Spiritual reflections. What really happens when someone passes away? Understanding the signs and the spiritual process of transition. Have you ever wondered what truly happens when a person passes away? For many, death and what happens after are still shrouded in mystery, fear, and often misinformation, while physical death is seen by many as the end of a journey. Spiritism, a doctrine codified by Allan Kardec, proposes a completely different and comforting view. Death is not an end, but a transition from one phase to another in each being's spiritual journey. What happens to the spirit? Where does it go? How does it feel after passing away? What are the spiritual processes involved after death, whether from natural causes, violent deaths, or even suicide? How does the mind of the departed handle this transition? These are just some of the many questions that can arise from the topic of spiritual transition. In this video, we will explore the different types of transitions and how departed spirits face various situations, whether it's the pain of an illness, the shock of a sudden death, or the difficulties of suicide. We will also talk about the influence of spirituality in the transition process and how a person's perispirit and spiritual energy continue to influence their journey after physical death. Furthermore, we will understand how the Spiritist codification clarifies the continuity of life and the spirit after passing away. In the end, we will also reflect on the role of inner reform and how our actions, thoughts, and attitudes directly influence our own transition process and our spiritual evolution. Death and the process of transition, a profound spiritual shift. Death has long been a taboo for most religions and cultures which seek answers to this universal mystery. The Spiritist view, however, offers us a more comprehensive perspective. According to Allan Kardec's teachings, death is not the end of everything, but rather a transition of state. The spirit, or soul, continues its journey, and the separation from the physical body is, in fact, a natural stage in a human being's spiritual evolution. Upon passing away, the spirit experiences a process that can vary according to its degree of evolution and the type of death. The perispirit, which is a kind of copy of the physical body on the spiritual plane, remains connected to the physical body for some time, especially in more traumatic or sudden deaths. This connection is not immediate and, depending on the circumstances of the passing, it can take days or even weeks for the spirit to completely detach from matter. The process of transition can be compared to a passage between two worlds, the physical and the spiritual. The nature of the spirit and the moment of its evolutionary journey determine the smoothness or difficulty of this transition. However, all spirits, regardless of their evolution, go through a phase of readaptation to the new plane of existence. The process of passing from illness, a gradual death with spiritual completion. When death occurs due to an illness, the transition process tends to be more gradual. The person may begin to detach from their physical body little by little, especially in cases of chronic or terminal illnesses. During this period, spiritual mentors work actively to ensure the detachment from the physical body is as peaceful as possible. They act to alleviate the spirit's suffering and prepare the being for their new life on the spiritual plane. This disconnection from the physical body is spiritually planned. That is, the person, even without full consciousness, had already chosen this path before incarnating. The illness, then, can be seen as an instrument of learning or atonement for past mistakes, or even as a spiritual mission. The crucial point for a peaceful transition is the spirit's merit. The more evolved the spirit, the easier it will be for them to detach from matter and transition to the spiritual plane. This gradual detachment can last until the very last moments of life, and spiritual mentors are fundamental in this transition process. Furthermore, during the illness, The spiritual realm can provide temporary improvements so that the person can experience a moment of relief before the final transition. This does not mean that death is being avoided, but rather that it is a spiritual process carefully planned for the well-being of the spirit and their family. Violent death, the shock and confusion of a sudden transition. In the case of a violent death, such as an accident or murder, the spiritual process is much more traumatic for the transitioning spirit. When death occurs abruptly and unexpectedly, the spirit can feel disoriented and confused, not immediately understanding that physical life has come to an end. This type of sudden death can leave the spirit in a state of mental shock, where they try to understand what happened, which leads to a series of emotional and spiritual difficulties. The spirit may even continue to act as if they are alive, going to their home and trying to interact with family members without realizing they are in a new condition. This mental confusion can last from days to months, and the spirit can visit loved ones without them seeing or perceiving their presence. This lack of perception is one of the biggest causes of suffering for spirits who have died a violent death, as they have no way to interact with their loved ones in the same way as before. It is important to emphasize that this mental confusion is a normal process and is part of the cycle of adaptation to the spiritual plane. Eventually, these spirits are rescued by spiritual mentors who work to help them understand what happened and provide a safe environment for their emotional recovery. This recovery process may include hospitalizations in spiritual hospitals, where the spirit receives energetic and psychological support. Suicide, a painful choice and its spiritual consequences. Suicide is one of the most sensitive and complex issues within Spiritist doctrine, and the analysis of what happens to the spirit who commits this act is profound and clarifying. Suicide is not seen as a definitive escape from suffering, but as a frustrated attempt to escape difficulties, which results in great spiritual suffering on the spiritual plane. When a spirit decides to take its own life, it is often making this decision impulsively, without understanding the spiritual consequences it will bring. Spiritual mentors always warn that suicide is not the solution to problems in the material life, but rather a way to delay spiritual evolution. The pain caused by the choice of suicide is not erased, but transforms into greater suffering for the spirit, who often has to go through an intense process of purification. After suicide, the spirit is taken to dense regions of the spiritual plane, known as the Valley of Suicides, where they constantly suffer the pain and regret of their choice. The suffering in the Valley of Suicides is a direct reflection of the physical pain the spirit experienced at the moment of their passing. And these spirits can relive the pain constantly until they understand the gravity of their act. Over time, through genuine repentance and divine mercy, these spirits begin to be rescued by spiritual mentors who provide a new opportunity for spiritual growth. The rescue process can be lengthy, but the ultimate goal is always the evolution of the spirit, allowing them atonement and learning. Detachment from the material world and the process of spiritual evolution. In all cases of passing, whether from illness, accident, or suicide, there is a process of detachment from the material world that must be fulfilled by the spirit. Attachment to matter is one of the greatest obstacles to spiritual evolution, as spirits still incarnated tend to cling to material possessions, earthly relationships, and physical experiences. When the spirit passes away, detachment is necessary for them to progress spiritually. This detachment often takes time, especially when there are unresolved emotions, such as longing, regret, anger, or guilt. The suffering of the departed spirit is often a reflection of their difficulty in letting go of what they knew in the physical world. The process of death can be painful and challenging, but it is, at the same time, an opportunity for the spirit to evolve and more deeply understand the reason for their existence. The love, understanding, and mercy of God are the forces that will guide the spirit through this process. Death as a necessary transition. Death, contrary to what many people think, is not the end, but an important and necessary transition for the evolution of the spirit. Each type of passing, whether from illness, accident, or suicide, carries a spiritual lesson, although the suffering of each one is unique. Through inner reform, detachment from material possessions, and the search for self-knowledge, we can help in the spiritual transition process, both for ourselves and for our departed loved ones. Spiritism teaches us that life continues and that death is just a necessary step in the spiritual journey. If you are interested in this profound topic and want to learn more about the process of spiritual transition and how Spiritism explains the continuity of life, subscribe to the channel, turn on notifications, and give a like to the video. Share with your friends and help spread the Spiritist teachings, an act of charity that can transform lives and bring more understanding about the meaning of human existence. Be a part of this journey of spiritual evolution. Knowledge brings peace, and here we are to learn and grow together.